I'm Nicholas Kuhne, founder of Wunderbrand, and we're going to deep dive into the world of branding, digital marketing, and entrepreneurship. My career includes working with some of the world's top brand and advertising agencies, as well as working at brands like Nando's, MTV, and Comedy Central, where for 20 years I've honed my expertise in building brands in emerging markets. Based here in Oslo, I lecture on digital marketing, helping the next generation of marketers navigate this dynamic world. I'm here to share powerful insights from my own journey and bring you the wisdom of leading voices in branding and marketing from across the globe. Whether you're an entrepreneur looking to scale, a student eager to learn, or a business seeking to elevate your brand, you're in the right place.
Hello everyone. I'm very excited to have one of my oldest and dearest friends, well not that old, but one of my friends I've had for a long time, Mike Nugali. So it's going to be hopefully quite an interesting chat. Mike, whereabouts in the world are you now?
Well, I'm actually in Johannesburg at the moment, but I'm Irish, as you can detect from my accent.
So, Mike, we first met over a sales transaction many years ago. Why don't we start about how you got started in sales, and then we'll move into the branding discussion, because that's where it gets really excited, and your dealings with China and building fantastic new products in a completely new industry. Let's have a quick chat about your background.
I got into sales by accident. I used to be very shy when I was younger. One night I was in a pub in Dublin, and when I was about 18, 19, and I was quite drunk, and I was holding court, as they say. A guy told me, Mike, if you got into sales, you'd be brilliant. If you could do what you do now when you're a little bit tipsy, you'd be brilliant. So I did go and I started selling alarms, and it was all knocking on doors. It was one of those things where you could make lots of jokes, you know, where do we put the panic button beside the bed and all that type of stuff in case the husband gets a bit frisky. And then I moved into selling double glazing. There's quite a lot that you can talk about double glazing, believe it or not. They're not all shysters. It is a skill. When I was selling for this company in Ireland, they were 2 or 3 times more expensive than the competition. If you got bogged down by price, you would never sell anything. So I wanted to emphasize quality and sell the difference. If they were €1,000 and I was €1,500, why would he want to spend €500 more on me? I became an expert in all the different facets of double glazing. And I tried to explain to them that getting double glazing is like getting an operation on your house. I always asked them, if you're getting a heart operation, would you be getting quotations? And they said no. So that sort of different. But I always felt that being ethical was very important. That if you work out what's in it for the customer, what's in it for you will look after itself. So I always had a ethos that I'd always try and look out for their interests, even if they didn't buy off me. And I ended up finding I was getting 2 out of 3 orders. And then what happened is I moved to the UK. By the way, I'm 62 now. And I got into computers back when IBM was selling IBM XTs, ATs, and like we're talking about nearly 40 years ago. I actually talked my way into getting a job, because back then you had to have experience in computers to get a job selling computers. And I decided that one of the flaws was that for every 10 people they'd employ, 9 of them were duds. So they were paying a lot of money to recruitment companies. So I rang up the CEO of a company and I told him, instead of paying the recruitment company the fees, can you give me 3 months probation? They said, yeah, that's a bit of a novel idea. So they got me in a 3 months probation, and I flourished, and I found I had a natural aptitude for understanding computers and how they work. It was all cold calling as well. Most people hate cold calling, but I loved it because you were in control of your own destiny and how much you could earn. If you understand that people's time is precious. So when you ring them up, don't ask them, how are you keeping? And, all those type of things a doctor wouldn't even ask them. Ring them up and say, my name is Mike Nugali. I understand a bit about your business and I think I can help you. I know now is not a convenient time. Would it be okay to ring you back later on? That takes less than 15 seconds. And people will give you 15 seconds before they put the phone down. They'll appreciate that you appreciate their time. And invariably, when you ring them back, you've got more time. However, when you're ringing them, make sure you understand a little about their business. And they might not know why you're going to benefit them. So you need to be able to tell them very, very quickly. I worked a lot in the construction industry, selling to those guys, and the humor in the construction industry in the UK was fantastic. Unfortunately, they had a different attitude towards Irish people back then than they do now, and that's in the 1980s. And they wondered why these Irish fellas, they're a little bit smarter than we thought they were, because the Irish jokes, the Paddy jokes, were very prevalent at that time. Things have changed somewhat since then. We helped a lot of companies, and I got great satisfaction out of improving the person's life that I was selling a product or a service to. If you don't have that mentality, you shouldn't be in sales. The only thing I'd say about good salespeople is that they're not salespeople per se, they're evangelists. They're very enthusiastic about the product that they're selling and how it can benefit a customer. There's nothing worse than a salesperson who sells up here and delivers down here. That's always going to be shrouded in disappointment. Whereas I would sell here and deliver up here. I'll always make sure that I profile the customer right and get the right person to deal with them, that the similar type of mentality. And I learned all that from selling double glazing. One of the things about selling double glazing is that you learn to read people. You meet some wild and interesting people, and I'm sure, Nick, I could regale you with some very funny stories, but I won't. What would happen is, if you're selling double glazing, you might sell the wife that the house is going to look very nice inside and it's going to be her little nest, and the husband who might be a lazy layabout who likes to go down to the off license and has a few drinks and goes down to the bookies and places a few bets. You can tell him that when he puts the new windows in, he won't have to paint them, which means there's one less job for him to do, leave more time to look at the horses. So that's something that transcended right across to selling double glazing. I did that for about 10 years. Then my twin sister had a bereavement and asked me to come over to her in Germany. I went over there, and unfortunately, I didn't speak German, and they didn't, some of them speak English. And I got a job with Berlitz teaching Germans how to speak English. So if you ever come across a German who doesn't pronounce his THs, then you know that Mike Nugali it's this, that, these, and those, 33 and a third, all that type of stuff. So I learned humility for the first time there. And I also learned that you can do things that you never thought you could do by pushing it out at about 55 people. And the other teachers were wondering, why are they always laughing in Nugali's class? And the reason being is that I taught them how to speak the language first and get comfortable with it, and then taught them the grammar afterwards. So they would use all sorts of misspelling and misphrases. They always bought me drinks afterwards, and it was wonderful. When I was bored, trying to get a book in English in Germany was difficult enough at that time. And one book I bought was by a chap called Dale Carnegie, and it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. When I read that book, it changed my life and outlook about a lot of things and how you interact with people. For anybody who doesn't know about Dale Carnegie or that book, it basically teaches that people are trained to be lawyers and doctors and mechanics and all those, but they don't teach interpersonal skills, how to be a better person. And if you think about the most famous people out there, the most successful, like Nelson Mandela or Barack Obama or some of the captain, one of the great attributes that they all have is the ability to get the best out of other people. And no other than Warren Buffett would be a great advocate for Dale Carnegie. He went on a course, and in his office, one of his pride of places is a certificate to Dale Carnegie. There was a book that was written in the 1920s, and it's still relevant today. It would enrich people's lives. I gave it to maybe 40, 50 people in my life. In the early stages, people would get offended when you give it to them. They go, "Hold on, say, do you think there's a problem with me?" Say, "No, it's just unfortunate that when he wrote that book back then." I was invited to come down to South Africa in 1995, and I couldn't believe the country had just got their democracy, their voting. It was an extremely exciting time down there. And I went, and it was like the Wild West, anything goes. It was just fantastic. And it's still, unfortunately, it has more challenges now today than it had then. A wonderful place. I think I've spoken probably a little bit more than I should as an intro, Nick.
I can see the sales juice coming out now because, again, very interesting stories and a very engaging way of telling it. Now, Mike, one of the things that comes out when I hear you talk is the importance of empathy. And that doesn't mean when somebody's sick saying, "Oh dear, I hope you get better," but this real desire to understand how somebody else works, how they think, and how you could benefit them, whether it's personally or through business services. You mentioned the double glazing, the builders and the computer sales. You mentioned that you were quite shy. I find it hard to believe, but I do believe it because some people who are great salesmen and great comedians and, great at public speaking generally are averse to, are actually naturally shy and have to push themselves out of their shell. For a lot of my students, we do presentations every day, whether they like presenting or don't like presenting, they have to present. It's that practice. I'm sure the first door sale you did was a catastrophe. But after number 10, 20, 30, you got pretty good at understanding what the customer wanted. And I think what's missing nowadays is tenure in a role and really understanding your customer, really looking for that win-win and finding those hooks to get the sale.
Well, Nick, in terms of empathy, I'll give you a bit of the background. I had an injury to this eye when I was a child, and they did an operation on it, which caused terrible damage. I was cross-eyed for about 35 years. That was probably one of the reasons why I was shy, because the eyes are the windows to the soul. In school, I would be the king of the ably challenged. All the other individuals had issues, and nobody ever bullied me because I was able to bring people to heal faster or better than them. So I could humiliate somebody verbally if they were a bully than physically get into fisticuffs, because we got into fisticuffs, then it was a different story. And that was one of the reasons why I was shy. And I'd say to any student, there's nobody perfect, but when you learn empathy with somebody, you genuinely feel for somebody, you care for somebody, and that's an intrinsically human thing. Some people just don't have empathy. They don't develop empathy because maybe their parents weren't demonstrative and tell them they loved them or whatever it is as children. But you as an individual, the more people you're exposed to, if you genuinely like people and you find people interesting, then empathy will come. What's interesting is, in the old days when I was going to school, is the measure of a person, his ability was either their daddy was wealthy or that you could memorize stuff, that you had a high IQ and stuff like that. But emotional intelligence is just as important, if not more important than IQ. It's the ability to adapt and to think. I don't like using acronyms like think outside the box and all that type of stuff. But the ability to look at a way around it. The Irish were very good at finding a way, because we relied on tourism before the IT boom came to Ireland. Everybody was a salesman for Ireland. And that's why everybody loves the Irish. No matter where you go, you're always going to have great fun. If you're playing rugby against them and they lose, they'll buy you a drink. Or if it's a question that he won, it's a celebration. But empathy is very, very important in life. It's something that is not taught at school. You're taught how to do maths and how to do things, but not how to be a better human being and how to get better with other people. Sometimes there are people that you meet in your life, you're not going to get on with everybody. You're going to get on with some people who feel like you've known half your life, some people you don't. I like to make people laugh because it's like a symphony in your ears to inject a bit of humor. And they say that that's a sign of high intelligence, is somebody who is naturally funny rather than somebody who tells gags or tells jokes. And in terms of getting up and doing presentations, if you understand your subject and you care about something, no script is going to help you. If you speak from the heart and you engage with somebody, they will know that you're authentic and genuine. For any of your students who might be a little shy, look at some of the bloggers out there. Some of them are good, some are not so good. Public speaking comes with practice. But I think that if you listen as much as you speak and use your ears in proportion to your mouth, in other words, twice listening, and let people talk about themselves, what a wonderful time. Being a great listener is a great asset in life. I actually found I've had people in fits of laughter in Germany and in Austria and some of the other places I've gone around the world where they can't speak English at all. But because of the humor and the mannerisms, you just end up having a great belly laugh. And no matter how bad life is, if you have a good belly laugh every day, that's where it's at.
I subscribe to that completely. Now, Mark, when it comes to the transferable skills that you've got, so let's look at, you started working 40 years ago. A lot has changed in 40 years. We've got the internet, I think Steam, I think you...
Very
internet and all of these AI and all of these wonderful things. Surely it should be quite a difficult transition from door-to-door salesman to brand strategy and beautiful brand design. So how did you get into the brand world, and what are those skills from your early days did you transfer over, and how did they transfer over?
If we keep on the theme of empathy, as Andrew Carnegie famously wrote on his grave, here lies a man surrounded by those who are greater than he. If you understand that there's the orchestra conductor and each part has a vital role to play in delivering something to the audience that they will appreciate, I realize, thinking about empathy, that there are brilliant people out there. Some of them are brilliant, but they're in the wrong jobs. And nobody's told them that they're in the wrong jobs. But sometimes I use an analogy that if you get somebody who's pedaling a bicycle, but they're not going anywhere, and you come along and say, see what's wrong here. The chain is actually after coming off the back wheels. Let's put that back on, get you going in the right direction, and you can help change their lives. When I came to South Africa, I'd have people who were brilliant at this and that. I found that if I could come across somebody who's really good, but they might not be great on vocals, they're more on the keyboards, then I could sell their services. I remember an interestingly where we did a presentation for business intelligence software to a client. The guy on keyboards wanted to do the pitch and let me do the background. After an extremely excruciating 2-hour sliding on Velcro type of demonstration, the crowd were nearly comatose. They were naturally falling asleep listening to him. Afterwards, he thought he did fantastically well because he went into a lot of detail. He asked me, what did you think, Mike, of that? And I said, it's a bit like you being a comedian and opening up with the punchline and then spending the next 2 hours telling the customer why it was funny. You need to understand that to get the best out of people, understand what your strengths and weaknesses are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. If you're going to pitch something, make sure it can be the best you can possibly do, because you can't get a second chance, create a first impression. Get it right as much as you can first time. As you said earlier on, Nick, everybody fails at the start. Try and work with people who are much better than you are. I found that when I got into the branding area, we can talk about this shortly, is that a lot of the branding guys are very or the creators, as I call them. They tend to take umbrage when you try and suggest to correct them on stuff. That takes a little bit of diplomacy. Now, if you're into astrology, now I'm a Libran, so I tend to try and balance things, and Librans generally are very diplomatic. So sometimes it's better not to be direct and say, look, you stuffed up here or whatever it is, because that's just going to get their back up. But you might suggest to me that I made a mistake by not getting the brief right, taking the flak upon myself, painting them in a way that they can relate to, where there's no loss of face. Work with the best people that you can, and you know what good looks like. If you can look at different things and understand how did that product become the way it was, and you know what good looks like compared to what average looks like. And unfortunately, the average person that you come across measure themselves on a bar of mediocrity rather than aspirating to be the best, because being the best is where it's at. That's where the money is. That's where people want to pay for stuff. And having a good imagination is always very helpful. As far as selling is concerned, people don't knock selling. Remember, if a sales guy doesn't sell, nothing else happens. The guy who creates this beautiful watch or beautiful pen or beautiful building, if somebody can't get the customer to see the vision or to get as enthusiastic about it as the company, then no wages are going to be paid. A good salesperson is somebody who adds huge value to a company, and they create their own wealth to a certain extent, because it's not easy. It's a skill. We can have a master class on sales and how to qualify people and spot somebody good from somebody who's bad. One of the other things that helped me in the early days, when I was living in the UK, back then, they had these junk mail magazines, and I used to trawl through them and find a product. Let's say the retail price is $30, and some little old lady might be selling it for $6. I'd buy it off her and get the story that she won it in a competition. And then I would put it in the next week's edition with a much better ad, same product for $20. And then you get somebody coming out to you and haggling with you down to $17. Now, I've no problem with that. I've given the $17 under duress. In other words, I pulled my trousers up for the last time on this deal, but I've learned another haggling skill. And if he's really good, he might get me down to 15, but I know that I've made $10 on it or $11 on it because the market has dictated price. And that I learned, once you can do that skill, no matter where you go in the world, as long as it's English speaking, obviously, there are those type of opportunities out there. And that teaches you about understanding value. And if you understand value, the value in people, the value in things, the value in experiences, understand the value, because the cost is something that everybody is focused on. You need to talk about the value of something. What's it worth to somebody? Then the cost will look after itself. The only people who instinctively understand the difference in cost and value are banks, because they've got the one thing that all of us don't have, is they've got money. When you pitch something to a bank, he doesn't say how much does it cost first. He says, what's the value of that to me? And you tell him, okay, that's worth $1 million. Give me that. Whereas with everybody else, it's sharply take a breath, no matter what you say the price is. And that's where the haggle starts. But that's something that is a skill that you get great enjoyment out of, is haggling and empathy and all that type of stuff. And you'll also learn a lot about the more dubious, unscrupulous people in the world, because fortunately there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of not so honest people out there who and then you got your scammers and all the rest of it.
Mark, I think there are 2 points I want to pick up on there. One is that no youthful experience is wasted. So that experience of buying that product's dollars and selling it for 20, you've used that in various forms throughout your life. So I think it's very important to do things, no matter what they are, because in some way it will come back and be useful to you later on. The second thing is, and it's a very valuable point you mentioned, which is, what is value and how do you charge for value, especially in branding? You and I have had this discussion a couple of times. How do you get away with charging large fees for logos and branding when somebody can just go onto Fiverr or get it done at their local print shop? How do you motivate for starting for a new brand name, for the great marketing copy that you do, and for the new brand? How do you price that? I think a lot of folks would be interested in, how do you price a product that is almost commoditized now?
Interesting enough, I was always good at languages, good at English. And even as a teacher teaching English, I was good at explaining things and visualizing things and using analogies to get somebody to understand. So if you're trying to explain this concept, try and find something that they can relate to. And that comes quite easy to me. So in terms of branding, I got into branding by accident. A colleague of mine in South Africa is a big luxury property developer. And he was spending a lot of money with these agencies to do branding for them. But what happens generally with agencies is that the person who pitches the deal to the client is not the person generally who does the work. So what they do is they farm it out to a minion or a junior person, and then they just throw it out there, and they're more interested in the fees they're generating rather than getting a result for the client. Now, you're absolutely right about branding. People associate branding as a logo. Marketing also, it's just a logo. But it's not. There was one $50 million development that they were doing down in South Africa. It was a very beautiful high-rise, beautiful buildings, luxury top end of the scale. And when I put my quotation in for that, it was like $35,000 or whatever it was. And the guy said, how can you justify charging us down? Because it's just a name and it's a few logos and stuff like that. And I said, I tell you what I do is I fire the imagination and I create desire. In other words, what the brand does is it has to carry the development. So that brand that you come up with is not just a name and a logo. It has to look right. It has to stand out amongst its peers, all the competing products that are out there. It has to be catchy. It has to be something that will resonate with people. It has to create a desire in the person who's looking at it to say, hey, I want part of that. I want some of that. I want to buy one of those apartments. I want to live. It's the lifestyle. It's that sizzle. It's that essence. On this particular development, I came up with a very unusual name, and God, I got pilloried for it. They said, no, that'll never work. Never. I said, guys, give it a chance to marinate a little bit. What I was able to do is it was based around polymaths during the Renaissance era, the great golden age of discovery. By associating with polymaths, it allowed me to flesh the brand out, because a brand has multiple touch points. The developer needs to have a good brand that they can be proud of when they're going to the bank, and it's got to have credibility. But then it has to resonate with the customer or the potential customer. It has to resonate with the estate agent who's selling it. It has to resonate in the area. It has to stand out on its own, and it has to be something that's very different from everything else that's out there. And when I started doing it, the guys say, God, how do you know how? Because I think I did about 50 different brands. They all look different, but because I'm a voracious reader, and that's one thing I would say to all younger people, please read books, listen to podcasts, find out where people have trod the ground before you, because reinventing the wheel, living in a bubble, it's not where it's at. And my analogy for that, if I could give you an example, I try to tell my young son that if you could imagine we're all on a train and I'm in carriage number 4 and he's in carriage number 57 and we both have a mobile phone. When I come into the station, if the station is on fire, then I can move back to him and explain to him what's going on because he can't see what's going on. But forewarned is forearmed. By the time he comes through, he's ready to get off or douse himself in water or do whatever he does or get to be the first one on the fire extinguisher. That gives him an advantage. And that's why you need to constantly be learning. All those people out there learn all the time. Steve Jobs, Einstein, all of those guys are not afraid to borrow ideas, look at ideas, and come up with their own version. People talk about, oh, we can't rob that idea. Plagiarism is one thing. But I'm talking about looking at something that somebody else has done. It will give you an idea, maybe a font, a logo, a phrase, and then research and see if it's not been used anywhere else and come up with it. That's effectively what I did. But then I was working with people who were brilliant at putting that stuff down. It's a bit like in the Gutenberg times. Gutenberg was great at writing the stuff, but you need to get the typesetter to place it all. So the end product is a combination of both of their efforts. Now, branding today is very different from back in the day. And that's why watching a program like Mad Men, I can resonate. I think I would have been brilliant back then because it's coming up with phrases, coming up with ideas, whatever it is. And even in today society, you've got your influencers. That's probably the way a lot of people sell products these days. But you need to capture the imagination. The ideal sweet spot is that something can go viral. That's something we never had back then. You'd spend a huge amount of money on advertising campaigns, TV, wall to wall. Now, if you give it to somebody and they put it on their channel and it's 100,000 people looking at it, well, if you get 5,000 orders and you're making $100 per order, wow, that is absolutely fantastic. I actually looked at a Chinese brand that is growing exponentially over the last 3 years. And now that's going to be a bit of a game changer. It's a company called Shein. I don't know if you've come across it, but the way that they brand is not normal channels. They use influencers, and it's the low tiered influencers. It's the mom and pop equivalent influencers that they're getting their products out into the market. The jury's out on whether that's good or bad, not so much for how they sell, but the quality of the products and the impact on the environment. That's not a conversation for now. But the dynamics is changing, and it's changing rapidly compared to the way it was before. Certain types of branding, when you're selling a building or a development, that's always going to be a very personal thing. If you could fly, like I fly by Dubai a lot and you look at how those gleaming buildings and stuff like that, you just have to be there to appreciate whether you're going to spend money on it or not. I don't know if you're going to be spending a huge amount of time, say, oh, I'll buy that for $1 million. That's still going to involve a lot of selling, a lot of repeat meetings, a lot of touring and froing, a lot of tire kicking. You know what a tire kicker is, don't you?
Yeah.
That's the guy who goes into Mercedes-Benz, and the first thing the sales guy asks him is, hello, sir, what's your name? And what car were you looking at? And what was your budget? Because that's a very quick question. And if he says my budget was $2,000, it's almost imperceptible, but the sales guy be nodding to the security, and before you know, the guy's been escorted off the premises. But in terms of branding, in terms of that, there's different types of branding, and it depends also on the type of product that you're looking to sell.
So it's, as you said, quite a fascinating industry, multifaceted. Where I've seen your real skill in that space is your copywriting and your ability to come up with names. Your point of reading. Sounds like my dad as well. When I'd come back from school, there'd be a new book on my bed. So I think that reading aspect is perhaps declined a bit with the younger generation.
Man, and that's a conversation, Nick, we could have about it. There's lots of positives about social media, but there's lots of negatives about it as well. The issue I would flag here now is that social media is addictive. We've all become addictive. There's been a recent survey I was listening to actually only the other day where the average attention span 15 years ago was like 2.5 minutes for something. Now the attention span is the problem with that level of attention span is you can't absorb anything because your brain goes into an overload when you're trying to relate. And the ability to converse like this is very difficult because people are used to conversing through their phones and tapping and stuff. So that when you interface with other people, it is a little bit difficult, and it is very addictive. And
another issue with that, if we look at COVID, a lot of my students have also said the impact of COVID on their social lives and their interaction and the presentation skills has been quite detrimental. Mark, we could gab on for the next couple of hours, but I think we should have a separate session talking about some sales tips and tricks. As you mentioned, there are lots of talented people who are very creative and technically proficient at something, but you need that sales angle. You either need to bring in that salesperson to help take you to the next level, or you need to learn those skills yourselves. And often I'd say bring in to support you so that you focus on your
having a good
skills.
mentor, Nick, is priceless. Somebody who's got your interests at heart, but don't take criticism personally. If somebody doesn't like what you do, remember, my parting shot on this one is that you're 99% of the people that you come across, and most of the people look at the chalk mark rather than the blackboard. Knowing that they will find fault because they're assuming that you want them to say something crap about whatever you're doing rather than something good. So it's the big picture side of it, but don't be disheartened. If you've got a good idea, good product, you learn, and that feedback that you get sometimes is priceless because it can save you a lot of money. Maybe we can talk about that as a separate session, how COVID affected me in terms of reinventing myself, where you're locked down, and we'll talk about developing products for specific markets and why something might work or might not work.
Yeah, I think there's lots we can chat about. We didn't get on to the new products that you're developing out of. You are being an inventor yourself. I'm sure there are going to be a couple of patents coming out soon, and your process of getting that to market as well. Mike, it's been great chatting to you. And we will definitely be chatting a bit more about sales, empathy, and the new product development.
Well, thank you, Vinnick, for having me on. It's been a real pleasure, and it's an honor because I'm a great fan of your skills and acumen. You're such a well-spoken young man. I'm looking forward to our next session.